In November 1875, the British government had 48 hours to raise £4 million. If they failed, France would control the most important waterway on earth. The Prime Minister sent a messenger to one address, not the Bank of England, not Parliament, a private office in New Court, London. What happened in those 48 hours changed the balance of global power for the next century. And it was done with a handshake. The story you learn in school goes like this. Britain bought shares in the Suez Canal to secure its route to India. A smart strategic move, imperial foresight. But that version skips the mechanism. It skips who actually owned those shares, who provided the money, and what they received in return. This is not a story about empires and strategy. It is a story about liquidity, leverage, and the speed at which power changes hands when someone has cash and everyone else has credit. The Suez Canal opened in 1869. It cut 4,000 miles off the journey from Europe to Asia. No longer did ships need to sail around Africa. The canal was a French project built by Ferdinand de Lesseps and funded by French and Egyptian investors. Egypt owned 44% of the shares. France controlled most of the rest. Britain, despite being the largest user of the canal, owned nothing. Every British ship that passed through paid tolls to France and Egypt. By 1875, roughly 80% of canal traffic was British. Yet Britain had no control, no ownership, no say in how it was managed. Egypt's ruler, Khedive Ismail, was drowning in debt. He had borrowed heavily to modernize Egypt: railways, telegraphs, palaces, the canal itself. European banks lent eagerly at high interest rates. By the mid-1870s, Egypt owed more than it could pay. Tax revenues were pledged to creditors. The country was functionally bankrupt. Ismail needed cash immediately, or his government would collapse. He had one asset left: his shares in the Suez Canal. He decided to sell. France was the obvious buyer. The canal was a French creation. French shareholders already controlled the majority. But the French government hesitated. Their parliament was not in session. Approval would take weeks, maybe months. Ismail could not wait. He needed money now, within days. So his agents quietly approached other potential buyers. Word reached London. On November 14, 1875, the British cabinet learned that Egypt's shares were for sale. £4 million. The deadline was November 18th, 4 days. The British government did not have £4 million sitting in reserve. Government budgets do not work that way. To raise that sum, they would need parliamentary approval, which required debate, which required time. Ismail's deadline made that impossible. The money had to come from somewhere else. Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli understood what was at stake. If France bought the shares, they would control the canal completely. Britain's trade route to India, its most valuable possession, would depend entirely on French goodwill. That was unacceptable. But Parliament was not in session. There was no legal way to authorize the expenditure. Disraeli needed a loan, not from a bank, not from a government institution. He needed someone who could produce £4 million in cash within 48 hours. No questions asked, no committees, no approvals. There was only one person in Britain who could do that. Lionel de Rothschild ran the British branch of the Rothschild banking family. His office was in New Court, in the City of London. The Rothschilds had financed governments across Europe for decades. They funded wars, stabilized currencies, and arranged loans that national treasuries could not manage. They had one advantage over every other financial institution: speed. They did not need board approval or parliamentary debate. If Lionel agreed, the money appeared. On November 15th, Disraeli sent his personal secretary, Montague Corey, to New Court. The message was simple. The British government needed £4 million in 48 hours. Could Rothschild provide it? Lionel asked one question: what is the security? Corey replied that the security was the British government's word. That was enough. Lionel agreed on the spot. No contract, no formal documentation, just an agreement between two men. The interest rate was 5% plus a commission. Rothschild would have the money ready by the deadline. On November 18th, the funds were transferred. Britain purchased Egypt's 44% stake in the Suez Canal. Ismail received his £4 million, paid his most urgent creditors, and delayed collapse by a few more years. France woke up to discover Britain now co-owned the canal. Disraeli sent a note to Queen Victoria. "It is just settled. You have it, madam." 4 days, one loan. The strategic map of the world had shifted. The official story stops there. Britain secured the canal. Empire saved. But the mechanics are more revealing. The British government did not own those shares, not immediately. Rothschild did. The loan structure meant that until the principal was repaid, the shares were collateral. Rothschild held them. The government eventually repaid the loan with interest, but for a period of months, the Suez Canal was not owned by the British state. It was owned by a private bank as security for a loan. This is a pattern. Governments operate on budgets, approvals, bureaucracy. Private finance operates on speed. When a crisis hits, speed wins. This was not the first time a private bank had shaped the outcome of a geopolitical crisis. Consider the Napoleonic Wars. European governments needed cash to fund armies. The Rothschilds arranged loans across borders, moving gold from London to continental armies faster than any state treasury could. They profited immensely, but they also determined which governments could continue fighting. Or consider the 1825 financial panic. The Bank of England was on the verge of collapse. Rothschild loaned gold to stabilize the system. The British pound survived. So did the Rothschild fortune. Or look at the United States in the 1830s. The Second Bank of the United States, a quasi-governmental institution, lost its charter. President Andrew Jackson distrusted centralized banking. The result was financial chaos. State banks issued currency with no oversight. Panics and bank runs followed. By the 1850s, European banks, including Rothschild affiliates, were financing American infrastructure projects because American banks could not provide stable capital. Railroads, ports, telegraphs, foreign finance filled the gap domestic institutions could not. The pattern is consistent. Governments need money faster than their systems allow. Private institutions provide it. The terms are rarely public. The collateral is often strategic. And the long-term consequences exceed the immediate transaction. The Suez loan is a perfect example. Rothschild made a profit, a modest one by his standards. But Britain gained control of the canal, which justified its later occupation of Egypt in 1882. That occupation lasted 70 years. It turned Egypt into a British protectorate, reshaped Middle Eastern politics, and set the stage for conflicts that continue today, all from a 48-hour loan. Egypt's story did not end in 1875. Ismail's debts continued to grow. By 1879, European creditors effectively controlled Egypt's finances. Ismail was forced to abdicate. His successor, Tewfik, was even weaker. In 1882, Egyptian nationalists revolted against foreign control. Britain intervened militarily, citing the need to protect the canal. The occupation was supposed to be temporary. It lasted until 1956. The justification was always strategic, but the foundation was financial. Britain's ownership of canal shares gave it a legal and economic stake. That stake justified intervention. Intervention became occupation. Occupation became empire. France did eventually challenge British control. In 1956, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the canal. Britain and France, along with Israel, invaded to retake it. The operation was a military success and a political disaster. The United States and Soviet Union both opposed the invasion. International pressure forced Britain and France to withdraw. The Suez Crisis marked the end of British and French dominance in the Middle East. But it also confirmed something else. Control of infrastructure is control of trade, and control of trade is power. The canal itself, the physical waterway, mattered less than who decided the terms of access. Today, the Suez Canal is controlled by Egypt through the Suez Canal Authority. It generates billions in annual revenue. Roughly 12% of global trade passes through it. When the Ever Given, a container ship, blocked the canal for 6 days in 2021, global supply chains seized, oil prices spiked, shipping delays cascaded across continents. The world was reminded that a single choke point, 120 miles long, determines the flow of goods between Europe and Asia. And that choke point exists because a French engineer designed it, European banks financed it, and a British Prime Minister borrowed £4 million in 48 hours to control it. The Rothschild loan itself was repaid within months. The interest and commission totaled a small fraction of the strategic value Britain gained, but the loan established a precedent. When governments face urgent crises, private finance can move faster than democratic institutions. This is not inherently corrupt or conspiratorial. It is structural. Democracies require debate, votes, oversight. Crises require speed. The gap between those two realities creates opportunities for those with liquid capital, and those opportunities shape history. Consider how infrastructure is financed today. Ports, pipelines, telecommunications networks. Governments often lack the immediate capital or political will to fund them. Private investment steps in. The terms are usually favorable to the investors: long-term leases, revenue guarantees, legal protections. Once built, the infrastructure becomes essential. Governments cannot easily reclaim control without triggering legal battles or financial penalties. The Suez loan was a 19th-century version of the same dynamic. Strategic assets, urgent timelines, private liquidity. The outcome is predictable. Whoever provides the capital defines the terms. The Suez Canal remains vital. Every year, proposals emerge to build alternatives: a canal through Israel, a railway across Asia, expanded shipping routes through the Arctic as ice melts. None have replaced Suez. Geography is stubborn. The canal connects two seas through the shortest possible route. Alternatives are longer, more expensive, or politically unstable. So the canal remains, and with it, the reminder that infrastructure built in the 19th century still dictates 21st century trade. What happened in November 1875 was not unusual. It was efficient. A government needed something it could not legally obtain in time. A private institution provided it. The transaction was legal, profitable, and strategically decisive. No conspiracy was required, just liquidity, timing, and the understanding that power flows toward those who can act when others cannot. Disraeli called it a triumph. Rothschild called it business. Egypt called it survival. All three were correct. The loan was repaid. The shares stayed with Britain, the canal stayed open, ships kept moving, trade continued. But the mechanism behind it, the 48-hour handshake that shifted control of a global choke point, that mechanism is still in use. Different names, different assets, different crises. The structure remains. Disraeli wrote in his diary that he had secured the highway to India. He had. But he had done so by proving that when time runs out, governments do not control outcomes. Those with cash do.